Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is a profile on Mr. Charles Bass, who is a candidate for the Sheriff's Office in Davidson County. And of course, we have with us to give us that profile on Mr. Charles Bass himself. And of course, Mr. Bass, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you, and I appreciate it very much for having me on the show.
And to tell you, Mr. Bass, how delighted we are to have you, and at the same time to remind you that we had you on this show back in 1987, I think it was.
Yes, sir.
At the time, you were the assistant warden.
That is correct. I remember that very well.
For the system, the
yes,
River Bend system, I
yes,
think
sir.
it was.
Yes,
and you gave us an excellent show, I think, at that time.
Thank you.
And we're delighted to have you back as a candidate
I appreciate
for
it.
the Sheriff of Davidson County.
Yes, sir.
Why not let us give our audience some additional information about Charles Bass by having you, Mr. Bass, to give us, and by way of giving it to us, to them, to give us some information about your background, your education, some of your experiences, and some of the things that were important in terms of leading you up to the situation where you believe that you ought to be considered as a candidate for the sheriff position of Davidson County.
Yes, sir. I'll be very glad to. I began my career in criminal justice July the 3rd, 1962, as a correctional officer at the main prison. At that time, the main prison was the largest prison that we had. It housed approximately 2,500 inmates, and I was at that facility about 11 years. Over the years, I achieved positions of corporal, sergeant, shift commander. Then after getting my degree from Tennessee State, I was moved into counseling and in case management, and then into the position of deputy warden at Attorney Center and back at the main prison as a deputy warden, and then the position of warden, and then the position of assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner, and for a short period of time I was commissioner of the Department of Corrections in an interim position until the governor could name a new commissioner. So I've had something like 37.5 years of experience with the Department of Corrections at all levels. Just about been there and done that. When you talk about corrections in Tennessee, I've been there. One of the biggest challenges that I faced during that period of time, I think, would be when the federal court ruled that the entire system was unconstitutional and would have to be reconstituted or remodeled to bring it into compliance with federal standards, as well as several mandates that was given the department by the court. It took us some years to do it, but I'm proud to say that we was able to, during my tenure, completely re-overhaul the Department of Correction to bring it into constitutional compliance. And that took some doing, and I'm very proud of that.
Very good. You know, in other words, you got almost all of the experiences that you could possibly have in the criminal justice system.
Yes, sir.
All the ranks and the whole thing.
Yes, sir. I have not skipped a rank. I started at the bottom and step by step came all the way to the top. And in addition to that, also at about midway, a little bit beyond midway in my correctional career with the state of Tennessee, I was contacted by the American Correctional Association, and they asked me if I would come on board as a consultant. And for about 16 years now, I've been a consultant with the American Correctional Association. And basically what I do in that capacity is whenever there's a system out there in these United States that's having problems in some area, whether it be food service, security, visitation, classification, whatever the situation might be, we are called upon to go to that unit, that system, and to look into the matter and to lay out for them ways that they may solve that problem. So I'm really a troubleshooter for the American Correctional Association and has been for the last 16 years, in addition to my 37.5 years with the Department of Corrections. So all in all, I've got better than 42 years in the business.
And so you bring all of that information, that knowledge and whatnot into a position as the sheriff. Let's talk about the sheriff's position. What is that position in Davidson County?
The sheriff's position is somewhat different than the position in the Department of Correction. It is basically an administrative position. As you know, when metropolitan government became metropolitan government, the sheriff lost the law enforcement powers that had been associated with that position for a number of many years. It became more or less an administrative position charged primarily with the responsibility of managing the jail and maintaining custody and control of those detainees that's sent to us by the courts.
And so you would not be involved in investigative kinds of operations as the police. So you're saying there's a distinction between the police department and the sheriff's office. Is that what?
There is a distinction between the sheriff's office and the Department of Corrections, in that the Department of Corrections is an agency charged with the responsibility of not only maintaining custody and control, but also administrating the Department of Corrections. And I've had both administrative experience as well as custody responsibility with the Department of Corrections. But with the sheriff's position, I will primarily be charged with the administrative responsibility, managing the jail. And I feel that my 42 years certainly says to anyone who care to look that I am most qualified, uniquely qualified, if you will, to be sheriff of Davidson County.
Why would you want to be sheriff of Davidson County? Let's talk about that.
Well, it presents a challenge. The position is open. I am qualified. I have the experience. And I want to make a contribution to the metropolitan Davidson County community. I've made contributions through my 37.5 years with the state, and I want to continue to do that. And I feel that I am uniquely qualified to be sheriff of Davidson County.
How large is the sheriff department when you think about the, I mean, in terms of its reach? Is it over Davidson County?
It has responsibility for the totality of those people that's arrested and sentenced to the jail by the courts. It has approximately 3,000 inmates that will pass through that system in the course of a year.
You know, one of the things that we found in dealing with some of the social issues associated with incarceration and et cetera, Mr. Bass, has been the large number of youth that we have incarcerated in the system. And I'm sure that you know a lot about that coming out of the system itself.
Yes, sir.
But what can we do, and what would you suggest that might be done in dealing with these issues?
I think that one of the things that we can do and must do as a society and as a community is that we must focus more on the front end of the criminal justice system rather than the tail end. And what I mean by that is that most of your behaviorists, sociologists, and people that study behavior, they say that if you're going to make a change in an individual, that the best opportunity for you to do that is between the year 0 and 6 years of age. You have a great opportunity. You can just about make out of that person whatever you want to. But the older that person gets from that point on, the less your chances are of changing that individual. Because as we get older, we get set in our ways and our outlook on things, our folk ways and our mores. And if we wait until somebody's 18 years old or 20 years old, 25 years old, it's almost an impossibility to make a change in that person unless that person himself wants to change. But when you go back to 0 to 6 years of age, you can make out of that person basically whatever you want to, provide the programming and the activities there and available to that individual to participate. So I think that what we need to do to stem the tide of young people coming to our prisons and our jails is that we need, first of all, we need to have alternatives to locking people up, and we also need to deal with problem at an early age. You can go to the average teacher in Metro school system and talk to them, and they will tell you basically those kids that are at risk.
Very good. And of course, Mr. Bass, let me make preparations for this first commercial break, after which we'll come back and we'll give you an opportunity to continue this conversation. And of course, we'll be back with you following this short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Mr. Charles Bass, who is a candidate for the office of Sheriff of Davidson County, Tennessee. And of course, Mr. Bass, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about some of the issues that
Yes,
you
sir.
believe to be significant and important
Yes, sir.
in your campaign. And let's have you start doing
Okay, thank you very much. I think that based upon